Hi, this is Benjamin from Benjamin Krudwig Fiber Arts and Design, and this is lesson number 7 in my curious course, How to Crochet a Raglan Style Sweater. And today we are learning how to make sleeves. So I have one done here, and I'm gonna tell you how to do this portion from here to here. I did do a cuff just so I have a nice visual for you and you can know what to expect. So at this point, after lesson 6, you should have the body of your sweater crocheted up to the point where you're going to start your hem. So when you're doing your hem, it's going to be a couple of inches longer than the body of your sweater. So in your measurement that you took from here, your chest down, you're going to subtract about 2 inches off of that, and you're going to crochet as long as that measurement, and then bind off. At this point, it's actually very helpful to try on the sweater, just to make sure that it is hitting you in the spot that you expected. Sometimes gauge can change as you crochet. You can be more tight stitched or loose stitched, than when you began. Or your yarn might have changed a little bit if you're using a different ball of yarn. So it might be slightly different. Shouldn't be very different at all. But that does give you more control. Once you have crocheted for a while, you can control how long your sweater is or how long your sleeves are, and it just gives you a better fit and a better look. So I have a quick tip as far as when I'm working on a big project like a sweater or a blanket, I find that using crocheting in a certain area, and I have all this other fabric here, it gets in the way. So I like to fold this up and use these knitting stitch minders. These just keep stitches from your knitting together on a little clip, so it's good for thumb holes, or finger holes if you're making gloves or mittens. It's also pretty good if you're doing a cable with a lot of stitches and you don't quite trust a cable needle. In crochet purposes, I'm going to use them as a giant straight pin. So before we start putting that on, we're going to do the sleeve on this side, and at this point you have a hole here. You have an armhole from where you separated the body from the sleeves. And we are going to do the same style here as we did changing colors from the red to the green in the body of the sweater. We're going to do that over here as well. So I'm going to fold up my sweater and put my stitch minders in there. So the great thing about these stitch minders is they can go through quite the thickness of fabric. So I'm making sure that I don't pin any of this part of the sleeve to the rest of the sweater. I want to make sure that I can use as much of that space as possible. So at this point, I have what's left over from the other sleeve, the ball of green. And I am going to get right underneath this first stitch of the armhole. And I'm just going to do a slip stitch to get it in. This does not count as a stitch. It's just to secure the yarn. So I'm going to single crochet into that same spot, and then I'm going to single crochet again. I'm going to do 2 more single crochets before I start the pattern. And this is because in this area I have an increase from when we were increasing for the armhole, And it's kind of hard to do the spike stitch pattern that we have here into an increase because you don't know where that stitch is supposed to go. So I'm going to go ahead and start this pattern. So I've done a single crochet. I'm going to do a single crochet or spike stitch, 1 row down, and then 2 rows down. And I'm just going to do the same pattern that we did in lesson 6. Alright, so we're coming up on the end here, and I have approximately 3 stitches left to single crochet. So I'm going to do those. And then you're going to notice that there is a gap here. And this is where we did our join from one side of the armhole to the other when we were separating the body from the sleeves. And it does leave this gap. To make this gap close up, I actually do 2 more single crochets between there. So you'll see there's this one thread here, and then there is the stem of a stitch right here. So I'm going to go around both of them and effectively do an increase there. I'm going to single crochet 2 into that spot. At this point, I am going to single crochet into the next stitch, which was our first stitch in this row. And then we're going to start the spiral all the way down to the cuff of the sleeve. So at this point I am going to stop and I'm going to place a stitch marker because that is my first stitch. And I want to make sure that I remember that because as I'm going down my sweater, I'm going to need to know where I am so I can do a decrease in the proper spaces. At this point we want to know how many stitches we have on here because when we did our increases it added a certain number of stitches, the same number of stitches as it added to the body, and we know that we're going to have to decrease down to a certain number of stitches for the wrist. So I'm going to do a quick count of the stitches. Alright, so I've counted the number of stitches that are on my armhole, and at the current place where we are, I have 47 stitches. We remember when we did our gauge and then did our calculations that I need to go down to 30 stitches. So to figure out how many stitches I need to decrease by, I'm going to take the 47 stitches that are where the armhole is now, subtract where I want it to be, and I get 17 stitches. So I need to decrease by 17 stitches from where my armhole starts all the way down to where I want it to end. So I'm going to subtract about 2 inches, maybe 1 inch from my arm length, and when I do that I got about 80 some odd rows that I'm going to be going down from where I want to start my cuff. So that means I need to do 17 stitches, decrease 17 stitches over 80 rows. So that gave me about every 5th row I need to decrease. So in this situation, I'm going to do 4 rows of single crochet, and then I am going to decrease in the 5th row. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of my 4th row. So I'm going to do these last 3 stitches, and then in my 5th row I'm going to actually decrease at the beginning of my row. So I'm going to insert my hook there into 1 stitch, pull a loop through, insert my hook in the next stitch, and so I have 3 loops on my hook now, and I am going to pull through a loop through all 3 loops. So that's a decrease. Don't forget to put your stitch marker back in, and then you're going to continue going around. your measurements will be different. So you won't necessarily be decreasing every 5 rows. It might be every 4 rows, it might be every 6 rows. It depends on how long your arms are and how large your armhole was compared to how large you want it to be. So I have done my first 5 rows, and I am going to continue along this sleeve. However, before I do that, in the next lesson, lesson number 8, I'm going to teach you how to put a hem and a cuff on your sweater. So come back to lesson 8 to learn how to do the front post and the back post double crochet. Thank you for watching.